Charismatic Leadership. Jim Jones's charismatic approach as a leader was one of the reasons why he pulled a lot of followers to the People's Temple, eventually leading to one of the biggest mass suicides in history, killing over 900 people. Charismatic leadership in cults is like a magnet that pulls metal shavings. This process taps into cognitive dissonance and social identity theory, making it difficult for followers to question the leaders or leave the cult due to their strong desire for group consistency and identity. Instead, cult leaders use charm and persuasive words to compel and captivate followers into believing their vision. This leads to a devoted group of people dying for their cause. Their words are so profound that they can exert influence over the lives of their supporters. Cult leaders usually have magnetic personalities that make them confident and charming. They know how to captivate followers using tales that can mesmerize their audiences and keep them glued through the promise of eternal salvation and a sense of belonging. However, behind that curtain of charisma is a manipulative leader who acts like a spider luring insects with a web of lies that will eventually trap them. Before they realize they're doomed, it's already too late for the followers because their leader's silver tongue already traps them. Groupthink and Conformity. Groupthink and conformity functions can be seen in how fashion becomes a thing. When you see everyone wearing the same style of hat, even if you don't like the hat, you'll be pressured to buy the hat because you want to conform to society and fit in instead of standing out. This pressure to conform is similar to what happens in cults. Even if a particular cult's views contradict your values, you'll be pressured to adopt the same beliefs and behaviors. You want to conform to the same beliefs that people around you follow because you want to conform to the group's standards. This is often present in smaller, isolated communities. Even if you're not necessarily a devout believer, you want to feel accepted and avoid conflict. That's how groupthink occurs. People prioritize consensus and harmony instead of contradicting the views of certain members of the same group. So in a cult, contradictions and doubts are suppressed in favor of groupthink to promote unity. Psychological manipulation techniques. Cult leaders use invisible strings that come in the form of psychological manipulation techniques. It's like they're master puppeteers who make their followers dance at will and make them do things they wouldn't normally do had it not been for the cult leader's manipulative tactics. Charles Manson used his psychological manipulation techniques to gather followers into his family. He manipulated their vulnerabilities by promising them salvation if they would trigger his apocalyptic visions, which would elevate him to messianic status. Other than that, cult leaders are also known for using sneaky tactics, including love bombing, where they make their followers feel loved by giving them attention. A love-bombed recruit will feel unique enough to join the cult, just like how a naive teenager can fall for flowers and chocolates. Some cult leaders use control over basic needs to manipulate their members psychologically. Others also use fear to their advantage. It can come in the form of punishments from the leaders. Sometimes they convince their followers of an impending doom, causing them to fall in line out of fear. Psychological manipulation is the forte of an expert cult leader who knows the specific techniques that can force his followers to obey unquestionably. The role of isolation. A cult leader's isolation tactics work like an island that strands cult members in a secluded and isolated area with nowhere else to go. They trap supporters in a proverbial fortress to shield them from any influences from the outside world, making it harder for them to see the opinions of those who aren't part of their organization. When a member is physically, mentally, and emotionally isolated within a cult, opposing opinions and differing views regarding some issues will be challenging to come by. Their only opinions come from their leaders and fellow members, forcing them to have only one worldview. So if the only information that the members know about a specific topic is the one that their leaders feed them, they are more likely to stay loyal to the group, believing that the cult's ideology is the only truth. Moreover, isolation tactics also give the members a sense of exclusivity that makes them feel special. It's like the cult gives them the impression that they are in an ivory tower, but are, in reality, trapped in a jail cell of manipulation. Jim Jones famously employed such tactics on his followers, especially after he moved them to his Jonestown compound, physically and mentally isolating them from the rest of society. The appeal to disenfranchised individuals. David Berg's Children of God grew because he targeted youth members of countercultural movements during the 60s and 70s. He appealed to their disenfranchisement from society to create a cult with loyal followers. A cult leader who tries to appeal to disenfranchised individuals attacks their feelings of loneliness and helplessness. They look for people who have lost faith in society or have become disenfranchised from the everyday workings of the world. It's like how rebel groups look for recruits with the same hatred for the government. From there, the cult leader gives the recruit recruits a place to feel like they belong. They make them feel understood and at home, making them feel that the cult is the only place where they can be themselves. Someone who has a sense of belonging is more likely to stay loyal to the person who gave it to them. In this case, it's the cult leader. In short, cults prey on vulnerable people who are still searching for meaning in their lives. Cults lure them with the promise of love, family, and acceptance, only for them to end up getting manipulated into doing all sorts of crazy things for the sake of belonging. Identity reconstruction. Identity reconstruction was another tactic that Charles Manson used to create a cult of loyal followers willing to kill for him. He reshaped their sense of self and instilled allegiance to his twisted beliefs. When a cult leader uses identity reconstruction, they reshape and twist the beliefs and sense of identity of their recruits according to the cult's beliefs and norms. It's like you're playing with Lego bricks to create a house, but someone comes in and uses the same bricks to rearrange them to create an entirely different structure. The new structure is still made out of the same Lego bricks, but is no longer recognizable from the old one. In the same way, cult leaders simply use a person's values to reconstruct a new person that adheres to their beliefs. For example, if a person feels lost in society because he has no place in the modern world, the cult leader uses that vulnerability to reconstruct a new identity that hates society. Cult members who have identities tied to the cult itself are more likely to commit extreme acts to protect their sense of identity and beliefs. The process can be subtle yet coercive, allowing leaders to use different ways to break their members' personalities and sense of individuality to force them to adhere to their beliefs. Before a member knows it, they have lost touch with their former selves and have become receptive to the group's ideology. The bite model. The bite model is used to understand cults and is divided into 4 categories: behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. It is a cult leader's recipe book for a dish to gain obedient and loyal followers. Behavior control is the instructions given by a recipe. Cults dictate what you can and cannot do, and when you can and cannot do specific actions. They regulate your actions and limit the things that you can do. Information control acts as the ingredients you use in a recipe. Cults feed you information according to their beliefs, similar to how a recipe excludes all other ingredients from a dish. Thought control, meanwhile, acts as the recipe's flavors, in the sense that cults shape how people think through rituals and messages. They steadily change people's thinking by adding subtle yet strong spices to change the flavor of the recipe. Finally, emotional control is similar to how a recipe is presented to a diner. Cults use your emotions to make you feel guilty about leaving the group, just like a master chef uses a beautiful presentation to make you feel guilty if you don't like the flavors. Trauma bonding. The old saying goes, misery finds company. Trauma is a powerful tool that can help bond people like superglue. Whenever people have gone through the same miserable and rough experiences in life, they tend to find company in people who have also gone through the same experiences. Cults use trauma bonding to attract and keep members of their organizations. It's like saying, hey, we know what we've been through, so we can help you. These cults also create environments where members depend on one another for their safety and sense of belonging. As the members stay in the cult longer, the leaders psychologically, emotionally, and physically abuse their members. But trauma bonding allows the members to stay inside the cults in the hopes that they can do better to gain their leader's approval and hopefully stop the abuse, as they've already grown too attached to their abuser. Keith Raniere, the founder of NXIVM, abused the female members of his cult, but because of trauma bonding, the members stayed for years and even recruited new members to please Raniere and pass the cycle of abuse on to the new members. It became a pyramid scheme where the ones who recruit new members get better benefits, prompting them to stay instead of leaving the cult. The process of indoctrination. When you plant and cultivate seeds in a garden, they grow into plants. It's the same thing with the process of indoctrination, which relies on the cult leader planting the seeds of ideology into the minds of their recruits. They do so by using persuasive speeches, visions of grandeur, and subtle manipulative tactics that eventually grow into plants of ideologies. Once the seeds have grown, followers start to adopt the cult's ideas as their own, without even realizing how much their beliefs have changed. But the indoctrination doesn't stop there because, as gardeners, cult leaders need to weed out unwanted plants. cults. Followers must abandon their ideologies and adhere only to the group's beliefs. Their personal opinions are regarded as weeds that must be rooted out to ensure that the cult has an ideal garden of faithful followers. A member without any opposing beliefs is easier to manipulate for abusive cult leaders. One good example of this is Joseph de Mambro, the leader of the Solar Temple cult. He utilized the process of indoctrination by enforcing his authority onto his members and subjecting them to psychological manipulations until they were loyal enough to commit suicide and murders. Exploitation of vulnerabilities. Everyone has a weakness or a vulnerability that people can exploit. A vulnerable person is like a house with a weaker lock or a room with a busted door hinge. A careful and experienced burglar should be able to find such vulnerabilities, enter the house, and do whatever he wants. That's what happens when a cult leader exploits a person's weaknesses. Weaknesses can be anything, from feelings of loneliness and heartbreak or insecurities. But most people lock their vulnerabilities inside closed doors. Cult leaders, however, are skilled enough to break these locks open and use them to their advantage to gain the trust of their followers. When a cult leader is inside, they can rearrange the person's beliefs and ideas, just like a burglar can rearrange the furniture in a house he broke into. Before the person realizes it, the cult has already taken advantage of their vulnerabilities to force their ideals onto them. Warren Jeffs, leader of the Fundamental Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, claimed divine authority and manipulated the religious beliefs of his followers, ultimately using their vulnerabilities against them to control and coerce them. Us versus them mentality. Sun Myung Moon, the founder of the Unification Church, taught his followers that they were the chosen ones, destined to unite the world, essentially making them think that it was them against everyone else. The us versus them mentality is like a dividing wall that keeps two opposing ideologies on each side. Those on one end are the us. Meanwhile, everyone who isn't on that side is the them, or the others. What cult leaders do is that they try to distinguish their cults as groups that are in opposition to those who aren't members of their order, while making them feel unique and superior compared to outsiders. Because of this mindset, members of a cult believe that they know better than anyone who isn't part of their group, and are in a better position in terms of their beliefs and ideologies. The same mindset also allows them to stick together, believing that the only ones who can understand them are their fellow cult members. This mentality can be strong enough for members to actually cut ties with family and friends who don't belong to their cults. They see themselves as the ones who are correct and are willing to alienate or oppose anyone who doesn't share the same beliefs. The worst part is that they're only willing to accept information or opinions from the inside instead of the outside. Identity fusion. A bucket of water has a unique identity from the ocean, but once you pour the entire bucket into the ocean, it ceases to be unique because it loses its distinctiveness when it merges with a bigger body of water. Cults work in the same way by gradually fusing the identities of their members with the bigger identity of the entire group, forcing them to lose their individualities. Shoko Asahara of Aum Shinrikyo used the same tactic by making his followers believe they were all part of the same elite group, destined to survive a global apocalyptic event. Members of that group lost their individuality and were willing enough to commit acts of terror to bring about Shoko's vision. People in cults experience this when they adopt the group's values and goals as their own, becoming fanatics who take on the cult's identity. Cult leaders are to blame for this because they manipulate their members by coercing or feeding them information gradually and subtly that convinces their followers that there is only one universal truth. When members fuse their identities with the entire cult, they can no longer differentiate between right and wrong because the group's ideals dictate their discernment. This can force members to commit illegal acts, all for the sake of the cult. Deception. Deception is arguably the most common denominator in all cults, because cult leaders need to conceal the truth from their followers to force them into blind submission. For example, Keith Raniere deceived women into thinking that NXIVM was a support group, but was instead an avenue for him to commit abuse. It's similar to how a magician hides the truth from the audience using curtains. Audiences are amazed at the seemingly supernatural feats of a magician, but are blind to the fact that they are being tricked from behind the curtain. submission. In the same way, cults lure followers with grand promises, such as eternal salvation and enlightenment, but hide the fact that they have ulterior motives that could take the form of abuses or personal enrichment at the expense of the followers. The problem is that cult leaders are so skilled at hiding the truth that their followers fall for their tricks for years or even decades. This can create an illusion that could make it harder for cult followers to distinguish reality from a false image created by their leaders. The deception tactics can be subtle, but can also have powerful and lasting effects that can trick followers into blind submission.